Students document how they meet all of the program's requirements and expectations by creating records. This is a student view for Milo University for audiology, but the same workflow will work for a speech pathology program. Right from the dashboard, you have the option to add a new record. When you go to create a record, the first thing you'll notice are the details of the record up at the top. You can click the drop down to edit these details to choose the educator, date of the event, the term that the student is currently in, and the modality of the experience. You can also change these record defaults by using the gear, and that way every time you load up a new record, it will have these defaults preset. So it's a good idea to change those every term so that you don't have to keep changing these every single time you create a new record. Underneath the details, you'll see the requirements, and you can add academic, clinical, and personal requirements to a record. Most of the time, students will be entering clinical skills that they've done in their clinical rotations. So you can search for the clinical skills that you want to add to the record, and then you just select it from the list, or you can just scroll down in the drop-down list. Then each clinical skill has the option to choose the site population for that skill, the count, which is the number of times they did that skill, and then the time spent doing it. This is what will go into the clock hours reporting in the report section. Underneath the requirements section for the record, you'll see a learning objectives section. And one of the cool things about Milo is that it looks at the term that the record is being entered in and the requirements that have been selected, and then it checks those requirements to see what level the student is supposed to be performing at given the term that they're in. So for example, you'll see here we're a first term student in year 1, fall of the first year, and this student is expected to participate in 10 hearing aid fittings. We're measuring that objective being met by a procedure count, and they need to demonstrate through doing these records that they've completed 10 in order to be meeting the requirements for amplification. But if we change this to a second year student in the spring, you'll see that the learning objective updates to independently completing an entire selection and fitting. The measurement is a 3-point scale, and they see right there that they're expected to be a 3 on the scale. They can even click the scale to see what 3 means. And again, here it emphasizes that they need to be independent in doing this by the spring. So as the students create records, depending on the term that they're in, they see a list of the objectives of where they need to be every time they make a record. And these are the objectives that they'll be evaluated on by the educators who are approving these records. You can also attach documents to a record so students can upload outside evidence that they have of how they're meeting the different objectives. If you add an academic requirement like passing a particular class in anatomy and physiology, some of the learning objectives might include passing an interdisciplinary assignment. The student could upload that interdisciplinary assignment grade to serve as evidence that they've met this expectation. And then the educator approving the record can review that uploaded evidence and mark that as met. The student can also leave free-form comments to indicate skills that they're struggling on in clinic, or again, providing justification or evidence of how they're meeting each individual learning objective so that they can get those checked off. Students can then either save as a draft or submit right away. Saving as a draft is really nice for clinical skills. If they're doing similar skills each week, they can just continue to add on the draft and submit one big record at the end of the week or at the end of the month, rather than sending multiple individual records for approval. So let's go ahead and just say this is a draft. And then it takes you to the records section. To navigate here, you can always go into the student view from the dashboard under the metrics button, and then clicking the records section. But here we can see our brand new draft record with Milo Educator. The student can view a copy of those skills that they put in, and they can view the details of that record right there. They can also modify things like change the status from draft to submitted or back, and they can view, edit, or delete the submission. Students can also create records from the to-do list. The to-do list is a list of all of the program objectives for a given term, and students can toggle between different terms to see the different expectations that they'll have coming up. There's a really neat timeline tool where they can log in and they can see all of the skills that are expected of them in a given term, and if they have more terms in the future to get those checked off if they don't have time to finish it in the selected term. So here we're looking at fall of the second year, and you can see if the student hasn't completed the capstone, they could look at this timeline and say, okay, that's okay because I have 2 semesters left. Whereas this is really the last chance for them to check off participating in 10 hearing aid fittings they've had since fall of year 1. And at this point, the program is expecting that they've participated in 10 hearing aid fittings. So from the to-do list, you can select, just create a record for a particular objective, and it will pre-populate the record with that objective. So students may just go to the to-do list and make sure that they create a record for each to-do item, and then educators can approve or send back for revision those records, and then the students will know that they've met every expectation. If you go back to your dashboard as a student, you'll see now that you have some pending records. Any records that aren't approved will show up here. In this case, this record is saved as a draft status, and draft status aren't visible to the instructors. So let's go ahead and submit this, and now that record will be visible to the educator. Let's take a look at what this looks like from the educator's point of view. So now I've logged in as an educator for Milo University, and this is what the dashboard looks like. I'm able to view the program that I'm a part of and view any records that I'm the instructor of record for. Any records that aren't approved or sent back will appear on right here on my dashboard, so I don't have to navigate anywhere to review records from students. And you'll see in the top corner of this record panel, it says no records are selected for review. So I can come over here and select the records that need to be reviewed. And if there are multiple, you can select all of them and review these in a batch, which is a really, really nice feature. So in the reviewer, the educator sees all the details of the record. They can see the student and the term that they're in, and they can see the requirements and how many of each clinical skill and how long they spent on each clinical skill, as well as any academic and other personal requirements that may have been entered into the record. So then for the evaluation piece, the educator also sees the learning objectives, which are specific to the point in the program that the student is in. So you'll see here that this was an earlier record, and so the expectation of the student was to participate in 10 hearing aid fittings, but then the student later on in the program could submit a record, and maybe the program expects them to be performing those fittings independently. So the job of the evaluator is to look at the objectives based on the current point in the program for the learner, and decide if they've seen enough evidence of meeting these expectations or not yet. If they have, they can change the expectations to be met, and if they haven't, they can just leave them as not yet. There's also a feedback section where the educator can leave detailed notes on why objectives weren't met or just general feedback. Then the educator can approve or send back the record. It's important to note that only approved records will count towards reporting. And if a student ever tries to edit a record, it revokes the approval and requires resubmission and reapproval by the educator. Once all the records are approved, the educator will see the dashboard that's clear. So when an educator logs in and sees the green check mark, there's nothing left for them to do. They're up to date. If they want to, they can click the record section and see all of the records that they've approved over time. Let's go back to the student view and see what it looks like after the record's been approved. From the student dashboard, it says there's no pending records, which shows that the status of that record moved from being a draft or from being submitted into being an approved record. So students can click on the records section right from their dashboard and go see a list of all of their approved records. So this is that record that I made with Milo Educator, and I can view the record and see any feedback from my instructor. I do have the option still to come in and edit the record, but if I do, that will revoke the approval and require it to be resubmitted and approved by the educator. Now that I have a record approved, I can go into the reporting and see my progress through the program. In that record, the educator approved and said that I've met 2 of the objectives, which checked off one of the requirements for the program. This updates my progress bars and shows me how close I am to finishing year 1 fall. but I can always go and look at my progress at other terms as well, or see my progress across the whole program. We'll have another video about records where you can dive a little bit more into these details. Creating records is how students can demonstrate to faculty that they're meeting the expectation. They can search for academic knowledges that they've acquired, clinical skills that they've practiced in clinic, and even add things like self-reflection. They can upload evidence of immunizations and have those serve as requirements for onboarding, or upload any other information that you might need as part of the program. These will then all succinctly feed into reports that you can use to track your learners' progress as they go through an academic program.